Okay, so we'll look at the gradient of a line. So what's exactly the gradient? So a gradient, you can think of it as the change in the quantity of something. Okay, so you can also think about it in terms of a slope. Okay, so a gradient determines the slope in terms of a line. So the gradient, given a gradient, you should be able to tell whether a line is going to be sloping upwards or it's going to be sloping downwards, or it's just going to be horizontal. Okay, so that's what the gradient is. Okay, so now how do we determine the gradient? So in mathematics, we basically get to determine the gradient as, we denote it by using m, and then we say gradient is given by, under coordinate geometry where you're given 2 points, x comma y, and then another coordinate to be, let's say, x1 and then y1. Okay, so I was actually supposed to use, let me make these ones 2's. Okay, so the gradient is like the change in a quantity. Okay, so think of it as a change in y divided by the change in x. It doesn't matter which y value you start with. Okay, so a change in y, let's start with 2, so y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. That gives us a gradient. Okay, so I've got a question we can answer. Find the gradient of a line segment joining each pair of points. So for the first one, A, our gradient m is going to be, in this case I'll take this to be my x2, my y2, x1, y1. So I believe you understand that when you have what we call the x or y plane, you understand that this is the x and that is the y. So even if I give you coordinates from there, okay, let's say this is 3 and then that is 1, okay, and then you have another one 5 comma 5, okay, somewhere there. So you can clearly see that for this one we can see that the sloping is upwards, so we expect it to be a positive value. Okay, so the change in y, our y2 minus the first y divided by the x2. So of course doesn't matter whether you start with y1 and then subtract y2. What is important is you maintain the same for the denominator as well. So what we are seeing now, what we're getting is for the y2 we have a 5, y1 we've got a 1, and then for the x2 we've got a 5 as well, and then we've got a 3. So that gives us a 4 over 2, right, which is a 2. So this tells us the sloping is upwards from left to right. Okay, we can look at another example there. So for B, feel free to pause the video and just try it out. So I'll go direct. So for y2 we have 9, for the y1 we had 7, and then for the x we had 10, and then minus 4. So 9 minus 7 is what? That's a 2. 10 minus 4 is 6. So we have 1 over 3, because 2 there it's 1, 2 there it's 3. So this is how simple it is to determine the gradient of a given line. Now I need to summarize and repeat something very important that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so when the sloping from the left to right is going upwards, you expect that the gradient is supposed to be a positive. Okay, now when the line is sloping downwards, as you might guess, is supposed to be what? A negative. Now what about when the line is horizontal? What do you expect? So considering the x or y plane, and then we get to draw a certain line there perpendicular to the x-axis. So let's call this y and then x. So we can take an example. Let's say we have negative 2 there, and then here we have a 4. So it means the y value is the same. Let's say it's a 6. So when you try to come up with a formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So you notice that for the y, there is no change. So it's 6 minus 6. Now for the x, for the 2 points we have, for the x we have negative 2 and 4. So 4 minus negative 2. So that gives us a 0. 0 divided by 6 is a 0. So the gradient of the horizontal line is always equal to 0. Okay. Now in a case where you look at a vertical line, for the vertical line it's undefined, and the reason is simple. Y does change. Let's say here it's 2, there let's say it's 8. So it'll be a change in y. So we'll have 8 minus 2. But in terms of x, let's say that is negative 1, there will be no change. So one thing that you know is that you can't divide by a 0. So this is undefined for the gradient of a vertical line. Okay. Then the other thing, let me talk about it, which are collinear points. Okay. Let's talk about collinear points in the next lesson.